How you doing, Luke? How is life down under?
It's raining cats and dogs. Getting excited and nervous about this game. I think it's more about the latter. But yeah, how are you feeling?
Well, it's a funny one. I feel the start of the Premier League season is always, normally it's a time when fans are most optimistic. We're actually going to do a season preview quite soon on this channel, but today we're just going to focus on the Spurs game. But you know what? There's just something about it. I guess it's a bit like Christmas. Even a grumpy old guy like me starts to get a little bit excited for the season ahead. You see the games coming through. You do your fantasy teams. You're wondering what's going to happen. And well, look at how happy I look at this thumbnail. That is my current spirit, trying to bring back that spirit of 15-16, which was the last time that we were absolutely written off. We shall see. But yes, hello everyone, and welcome to a match preview here at For Fox's Sake. We try to take an objective look at things. We've got our own opinions, of course, but we like to try and give some facts behind our opinions and why we come that way. So we're going to start a brand new season, and we've got a fairly difficult game. We're playing Spurs at home on Monday night. We're actually the last game to get going. And we're going to take a look at everything. But I tell you what, Luke, it wouldn't be Leicester City if we didn't have any injuries. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what our current walking wounded looks like. What's the latest news with the injuries?
Jamie Varney out for approximately 2 weeks. I believe he is training of the team again. It'd be a sight for sore eyes, but down he gets rushed back into the side. He's had, Villarreal for preseason friendly, and that's it. Haven't seen him, been injured since. Connor Cody, we did see him feature. He possibly could have been in Cooper's plans. He's out for a month. And we also have Sutar out as well on loan. So that's two centre-backs we're without. Patson Daka, thank God. Although with how scarce things are, it still would be nice to have him as an option, seeing as we're now been forced to play Mavadidi up front because we'll talk about it later. Cooper doesn't rate Cannon. So how do you feel about the injury? Do you think it's crucial or not in terms of what little depth we have?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I know that you particularly aren't Patson Daka's biggest fan. You wouldn't be the only one in that club. I'm more generous towards him. I think he's all right. And I was actually intrigued to see what he could do this season because you never know, maybe a season coming into it as the main man, he might rise to the challenge. So I think that is a big blow that he's out for 3 months. And that is a big issue. I mean, I think one thing with Patson is I think definitely his finishing needs work, but I wouldn't take for granted pace and the ability to press people in the Premier League. You can force people into mistakes. And, we'll kind of come to it later, but I think if you've got pace in behind in the Premier League, you always have a chance. And that is something that Patson has. That said, if he was fit, I expect Jamie Vardy 100% probably would have been the starting striker with his experience and just the sort of aura that he brings. I think, I would only expect him to be more of a bit part player this season, but still, there's a reason we gave him his new contract. I think Connor Cody's the interesting one because under Enzo, he wasn't really seeing that much game time. He was more for the cup games and maybe help see out games or be more of a rotation option. Let's not forget, by the time we get to Christmas and the games come every 3 days, you still need your squad. But in the early parts, you will get more of a rest. And who knows, maybe Cooper would have taken more of a shine to him. It's difficult to say. So that one we'll have to evaluate. We have signed Okoli, so we'll see how that goes. Coley's been, I think, a bit more missed than hit so far in pre-season, but let's not judge the guy yet. I always think give people games. And even though, apologies, Luke and I do tend to be a bit negative at the moment, I think, first 5 games, you've got to let any new manager, new players, have, a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I mean, normally I'd give 10. I think the Premier League, because it's shorter and tighter and we're expecting it to be a bit rough this season, you can't be as generous of 10. So maybe 5 games plus the cup game, that would be 6 in total, plus pre-season would give a better accurate statement before we absolutely pull the knives out. Although my prediction is that Luke might be pulling the knives out the next time we do a match preview. But enough of that. So thank you very much for that. That's the injury list or the Swiss flag, however you want to view it. So let's move on and say, okay, there was a pre-match press conference this week. And I just want to read some things that Steve said because it's a pretty interesting thing. So look, I think the big, elephant in the room for all Leicester City fans is where are the transfers, right? We have signed some players. We've signed Caleb Okoli. We've signed Michael Golding, but doesn't look like he's going to play. We've signed Bobby De Cordova-Reid. He looks like he will play. And now we've just signed Facundo Buonanotte on loan from Brighton. But we still haven't replaced, really, for our best player from last season, which was Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. Perhaps that's Buonanotte. but you would still expect there to be more outgoings. And so far, we have a net spend of just 1 million. I mean, we did spend money on Fasal and things like this. So here's what he was asked. A transfer says, every season you want to reinforce, you want to strengthen. We're still going through that process. The club is working together and the communication lines are great. It's in a slow market. Once I knew this week that there wouldn't be additions for Monday, I put that to one side and focused on Monday. That's the only thing we could influence. Kind of interesting there. And then moving on, communication with recruitment chiefs. It's a very aligned club. You can see why it's had success in its Premier League history, such as getting relegated 2 seasons ago, might I add. That's what I'm feeling. The context at the moment is making us a stronger team and squad. Communication lines are clear. Some things haven't gone our way, which is not the club's fault. Let's hope we're where we want to be in a couple of weeks' time. The players here feel good about themselves, and let's hope we can take that into the season. And finally, he was asked, where are the goals coming from? The normal answer is the guys at the top end, and it's not the perfect situation going into this game. We have to find a way. We have to find the right strategy to make sure we can be a threat. We have to believe in our way and things we're doing, including creating and scoring. And that's not just the striker. It's about how you get it to the top end. We do have enough players to be a threat at the top end. So he said a few more things there, but there's a few spicy ones there. So I'm wondering, Luke, what did you make of the pre-match conference of Steve Cooper?
Sounds like he's either A, borderline scraping the barrel, or B, towing the line with the board. And that's to me, and just basically I'm about to make do of what I've got. In terms of transfers, it's been absolutely diabolical. How much of it is the board? How much it is, Whelan, Rudkin, Top? Do we blame who can we put our pitchforks at? Or is it people just simply do not want to come to us and we are just not a good proposition due to, us lying to Enzo, we don't even know what the point deduction is, Man City. And then there's so many things that could be factoring into it, but it's, in my opinion, having all these deals hijacked, like seeing the likes of Calvin Phillips and Schmodix and stuff going to Ipswich, that every team around us is strengthening and we look weaker than we were last season. You got to think about it. It's not just the experience we lost in the likes of, old Brighton. It's also the squad depth, and we're stronger in a league below. I don't know how much you want me to go off about this and rattle off about what we've lost and what we've replaced it with, but I think we're significantly weaker.
Yeah, let's save that for, I think, the season preview, but I very much agree. And yeah, I do think that Steve is towing the company line here, so to speak, which is probably makes sense at the start of the season. I do remember that Enzo was also doing that a little bit last season too. Like, he was asked what he thought about the trip to Thailand, and he was fairly political, and he said, it's not ideal, but we'll make the best out of the situation, which is his way of sort of saying, it's, expletive word I won't mention here. But look, I do have to say, regardless of our thoughts on Steve Cooper, you've got to feel sorry for the guy, right? Like, he's, you normally when you take a job, you'll probably be given some guarantees as the players that are being brought in. And if you have been sleeping under a rock, this week we missed out on 2 signings. We missed out on a guy called Adam Hložek, who is a Czech international from Leverkusen. He's gone to Hoffenheim instead. They hijacked the deal sort of at the 12th hour, and he has now officially signed for them. And the other one was Wilfried Zaha, who I was super excited for. I'm not going to lie. I've seen Wilfried Zaha in the flesh tear Leicester apart multiple times. He's got such talent. He's he's their Jamie Vardy, different position, of course, but you know what I mean? He's like a talisman. I really think he's a sort of person that could come in and make an impact immediately. And at the moment, that's fallen through, and it looks like due to some tax situation or something, we're not going to be able to get him. So otherwise, that's 2 players who potentially would have gone straight into the 11 for Monday night's game that aren't going to be here. And worse, we're leaving it late. And you've mentioned all the other teams are strengthening. Again, I'll save that kind of for the season preview. But, right now I had a look at it, and we've got, like, in terms of squad value, the second weakest squad in the league now. Only Ipswich have a lower value than us. So Southampton have actually spent more money than us now. And that's before they just signed Cameron Archer. So we're even further behind that. And Ipswich, their squad value might be low, but a great manager. They've got momentum, and I think they've made some good signings. So it is looking rough, plus, of course, the points penalty. So yeah, look, I think, what were you expecting Steve Cooper to say? He sounded a lot more distraught after the Lons game, where he seemed a bit more honest. But I guess he is saying there, and look, I guess the proof will be in a pudding. The window is still open for a few weeks. But what I would say, and this does annoy me, is that by not getting in the players now, we could drop points between now and the end of August. And if we go down by 2 points, again, it'll just be bad planning, send you down. which is terrible. So not a great place. But all right, let's move on. I thought that was interesting from the press conference. So let's talk about the opposition. So we're playing a team who we've got a bit of a recent history with, I would say, good and bad. It is, of course, Tottenham Hotspur. Good, we had that amazing title race with them, which we came out on top. Bad, I think the last time we played, they beat us 3-2 when we were 2-1 up in the 95th minute. Thank you, Yuri Tielemans, for one of the worst kickoffs of all time. So it is a bit of a tough one. The one thing I will say is Harry Kane no longer plays for them, which surely means that he can't continue his record of scoring against us. But look, I wanted to speak a bit about Spurs. And, I really hate to say this, but I do have a lot of respect for certainly one individual from Spurs. It's not just James Maddison, who we'll probably get to in a moment, but it's this guy, Ange Postecoglu. I guess I'm a fan of the Aussies. That's why I've got one on the channel. But I think Ange is a brilliant coach. He's been around the world. He obviously was with the national team. He did a great job at Celtic. He came to the Premier League. He wasn't Spurs' first choice. And yet I think they'll probably realise that they made a really good appointment here. And what I wanted to kind of point out here is he did an absolutely incredible job in changing their style of play. So prior to him being, they had Nuno, they had Conte, they had Mourinho, and they played a very defensive style looking to hit teams on the counter-attack. With Ange, they're a very front-footed team. In fact, I always go as far as saying you could say they're the most front-footed team. If you look at these stats here, high turnovers, they rank the first. So they're going to be getting right up in our faces and trying to win the ball back. I think they were more aggressive even in Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool last season. And that is saying something. You can see how high up the pitch they start. You can see their pressing sequences, etc., etc. So that's what you can kind of expect. And how do they achieve this? Well, Spurs and Ange do something that's very unique. Here's my lovely graphics that I prepared earlier. I actually want to give out a shout to the channel, The Football Meta, who I actually took these graphics from. That's a great channel. I'll leave the links in the description for this video. But Spurs, they start in a 4-2-3-1, but they actually invert both their fullbacks. But unlike most other teams, they invert their fullbacks into the number 8 position, which is kind of crazy if you really think about it. And what you see then here at the end is that they end up with this kind of shape. So they still manage to retain a back four, although it's a very narrow back four, and they still manage to maintain 2 holding midfielders, but they still manage to keep the front 5 shape. And of course, why do you have the front 5? Well, look, most teams defend with 4, so 5 is more than 4, so potentially you get the extra man. So that's very interesting. So their fullbacks push in right in, and that allows them to get that high pressing position, but does also allow them to be fairly robust on the transition, which is obviously one of the big things in the Premier League. And here we can see a little bit of their setup here. So, this kind of good and bad. Here they're playing Liverpool, and it doesn't really come much tougher than fighting this opposition. You can see, in fact, Liverpool are pressing with a 5, and right now they've just got 4 in view here. And this is the 4 that I obviously talked about, the 2 centre-backs and then the 2 holding midfielders here. But what you can see is ahead of this, and if they can find the right passes, is they've got extra men here. And that's the advantage. So they're going to be able to swarm the middle, and they're going to be able to find that extra pass. And if they can get that free man, they can cause trouble. So it is a little bit of a gamble. It's an offensive gamble. But when it works, it's going to mean that defensively, they don't have to use their defense much more. And you're going to be on the back foot. And given the fact that their overall squad value is probably 2 to 3 times more valuable than Leicester's, I think, spoilers, it's probably going to be a game where they're going to have most of the ball and they're going to be pressing up against us. So that's the kind of style that they're going to play. And you could watch out for this in the game. And there may be some things that Steve Cooper does to kind of match that. Because one thing I will say about the way Ange plays is that he's a plan A guy. He's a bit like Enzo. He ain't going to change it. So I'm pretty confident I can say this. I will say that last season, when James Maddison got injured, he did start making some tweaks because they realised that the team didn't work as well. But Maddison is not injured. And we as Leicester fans know all too well about how good James Maddison is. And it does make me a little bit tearful of all the teams he went to. But that's not his fault. And, that's how life goes. But this is then their lineup, and this is what I'm kind of expecting to play. So there's a few bits of team news for them. The big one is that they signed Yves Bissouma a few seasons ago from Brighton, but apparently he was caught inhaling some laughing gas. You cannot make this up. And as a result of that, he's been suspended from the game or internally fined by Ange. So that means they're going to play someone else as one of these holding players. And it's likely, I think, that they'll start with Archie Gray. Now, Archie Gray was the guy who played for Leeds last season. He's only 18 years old. They signed him for 37 million. It's a funny one. What are your opinions on Archie Gray, Luke? I know that you're one of Leeds' biggest fans.
Everyone knows that I'm not too fond of Leeds and not too fond of me, and that's fine. It's all banter at the end of the day. But I will always give roses to a player, no matter what I think of the club. And I think he is a great player, great prospect. You can see about how much they spent on him to secure his services. I think that's a really, really, really interesting take, and I do expect him to start as well. How he's going to adapt to the Premier League will remain to be seen, though. I can see him having some shockers, but I can see him coming into his own in a season or two. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're basically me, is what I feel, the Australian version. I very much agree. I think it is a good signing. I think he might be a bit raw because it's funny, when we played him last season, he was getting rave reviews in the Championship. But I thought that in both games, especially the second game against us, he looked very exploitable. Although he was playing fullback at that time, not necessarily in midfield. But there's definitely a play there. For the history lessons, the Gray is synonymous with Leeds. They had a great player called Eddie Gray in the past. So he could start. It is possible, by the way. They've also signed a really good player called Lucas Bergvall. And if anyone's played Football Manager, you'll know that he is a wonder kid. And he's also looked good in pre-season. So he could start instead. But I think just given the transfer fee involved, they will probably start Archie Gray. The rest of the team, so they've signed Dominic Solanke. We're going to come to him a little bit later. I think that's actually, I hate to say it, a great signing, even though 60 million is maybe a bit expensive. One thing I will say is that the way that they play is they love to do interchange between the front two. So at times, Solanke will drop deep and Maddison will push up. That's the sort of thing he used to do for us. We know that Maddison's got a real goal threat to him. They've, of course, got Heung-min Son, and Son is a great player. He can absolutely devastate teams. The season we went down, do you remember he scored a hat-trick, I think, inside 7 minutes coming off the bench? So you know all about him. And they've also got Dejan Kulusevski, Swiss international, formerly of Juventus. I think he's very underrated, very strong player. I think the other things to notice is that their two centre-backs are really, really fast and they push up. So one thing, and this is something that I sadly cannot say about Leicester, is that they will push their team right high up the pitch. But if there is a turnover, Van der Ven, I believe, was the fastest centre-back in the Premier League last year. And Romero's no slouch. So that means that they've got an opportunity to perhaps get back on the break. Although, of course, they often say that the first battle is in the head, that first 10 yards. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Luke, then. So let's imagine you and I, we're part of the Leicester City coaching team, analyst team, and we're thinking, all right, we know how Spurs are going to play. What's our game plan? How are we going to beat Spurs? What can we do to maybe take advantage of some weaknesses in the way that they line up and set up?
I think here, if they're going to press us, and if you're looking at the top underneath Song and Kulusevski, if they were to press up the pitch towards our goal, I would say that it would come down to on the counter and out wide.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there. That is probably what I would go for. So I guess you're kind of talking about these areas. So yeah, that's the same picture that I had before. And as you can see, they're going to push up, but there's massive gaps here in the fullback position. So if you can turn the ball over, and it doesn't sort of matter where you turn the ball over, if you get the ball into those positions or you can run into them, you can have a free reign. And, you know, one good thing about us is that probably two of the strongest areas of the pitch that we had last year were wide and on both sides. What is interesting is even though Daka's out, because they are going to have those two in the middle, maybe it'll be a big issue. Maybe it won't. We'll have to see. But yeah, okay. So that's how Spurs play. And that's potentially one of the areas that we could exploit with them. They also have a keeper a bit like Mads who likes to push up and is very good with his feet, but maybe not so good at saving. But then let's get on to the 11s. So we're going to go firstly for manager Luke's opinion of what you would go for. And then we're going to go for what we actually think Steve Cooper is going to try. So here's your 11, Luke. Talk to me about this. Who have you picked and why?
So as you can see, Mads is a no-brainer, but I've dropped back to Yannick Vestergaard because one thing from building at the back and just the reason why we did not maintain any possession, in my opinion, a huge reason against Rennes was Vestergaard was not playing, so his ball distribution was not there to be seen. One asterisk, maybe I could have gone for a Coley because Christensen, can he do a back three? He never wanted to, but for me, and what we know works at the club, I would like to have Justin on the right side alongside Yannick and Christensen, which is pretty crazy because that's two fullbacks I've chosen as a back three. But in my opinion, Christensen and JJ make up for the lack of pace and cover for Yannick Vestergaard. Ricky P, again, crucial for building it out from the back, and so is Harry Winks. And pretty much Winks, in my opinion, is the only one that can come in and receive a ball from Mads with a man or two already on him and then play his way out of trouble. That's one major thing that we haven't really had a chance to see yet was Winks. He's the only one that could really do that. So, yeah, Harry Winks, obviously, in his role. Now, Buonanotte, will he appear straight away? Things are pretty dire, in my opinion, so I reckon he will. But as your high-pressing eights, in my opinion, it's better to have Ricky P in that double pivot than it is Wilfred Ndidi. So, Wilfred Ndidi, Buonanotte, high pressing eights. Of course, on the wing, you got Fatawa and Mavididi. And up front, Tom Cannon. Don't have many other options. And in my opinion, you get the best out of Mavididi while taking his man on, stretching the pitch. And then if you want to pull up what I expect to see, I can talk you through that as well.
We'll move on to what we expect in a moment. But I quite like this 11. I might do things slightly differently, but I will ask some things and I'll get your opinion. So, to be fair, I mean, you've mentioned the kind of having the two fullbacks, but to be honest with you, that kind of makes sense because if you know that they play a 4-3-3 and you know they got pace on both sides, you know that Justin has proven to do a really good job against Son in the past in many games. So that definitely makes sense. And then I guess you're saying that, like, you know, Christensen up against Kulusevski instead of maybe Okoli. And to be honest with you, I could definitely buy that because Okoli, look, we need to give him some time. It's an interesting one. His first appearance, he scored an own goal. Didn't look so good. Then I think we played Augsburg, and I think he actually looked really, really good. I think I might even have given him my man of the match for that one. But then against Lens, he was absolutely awful. And we had that legendary clip where you spotted him appear from nowhere halfway up the pitch when we were defending. And then in the first goal that I showed, he made two separate errors for that one. So I don't know if you want to throw him right in at the deep end against a player in Kulusevski who is so good. That said, Christensen is also going to be pushing up a lot. I mean, that is one of the weaknesses of our team is that the way we play is that area is maybe something to expose. But I could definitely see this, that's for sure. I totally understand the thinking with Ricardo that I think is something I'm on board with. I also think the big thing here is you put Mavididi on the wing, which I think we think is his better position. And we've just mentioned that we think that that is the weakness of Spurs, is hitting those diagonals. So that makes sense. Buonanotte thrown straight in at the deep end. I think it's well. What I would say is who you haven't put in here is you haven't put in Bobby Reed, which is an interesting one, and you have gone for Cannon. So what is your thinking there?
I think Bobby Reed was a bad buy. I think it was a cheap buy. I wouldn't say bad, but I would say it's cheap and it's uninspiring. And he hasn't really done much for me in the preseason. Granted, it's preseason. He's a fringe player that Fulham was happy to let go at 31. That pretty much says everything you need to know about him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. And, you know, you've basically said we've got one fit striker, so play the one fit striker and don't do something stupid. But that, of course, is what you would do. But, of course, here's what you've predicted. So here's Steve Cooper's 11. Why don't you talk to me about who he's picked and why you think he will pick this lineup? And for what it's worth, I actually think he'll pick exactly this lineup too.
Thank you. This is more or less close to what we saw in our last game. Mm-hmm. JJ in the right, Faze and Okoli as your chosen centre backs. Christensen pushing well far up the pitch. Basic is almost like a left winger, left wing back, whatever you want to call it. Harry Winks and Ndidi. Buonanotte as your 10. Cordovarid as your left wing because he's going to put Mavididi up front, I believe, again. And Fatawu on the right-hand side. Now, this would be interesting. This could work and it also could not. But I'm very, very interested. But in my opinion, I think Faze and Okoli are going to have a mare if we play like this against Matters, Song. It's just Solanke. I think that's just going to be too much pace. It's brutal. I'm frightened.
Yeah, so I think we'll go for this as well. And I think there's a few reasons. One, as you said, the last friendly that we played, normally that's quite telling of how you're going to line up. I think the reason why he's done this is that Spurs do push up really high. And I think Cooper might be afraid of their pace. So he's trying to line the back four with as much pace as possible. Now, what I kind of get scared of, though, is that I've just mentioned that they rank number one for high turnovers. So in my opinion, you know, I really like your preferred lineup rather than Cooper's one, because I think that basically you've got two options. Option number one is you just keep pumping it long all the time, which, listen, is always a relevant option. As ugly as it looks, it's totally fine to go that way. But if you only go that way, of course, it gets predictable. So that means that you're going to have to play your way out of trouble. And I feel like even if you intend the game to never play out of once and always go long, you still need to play out sometimes, as crazy as that sounds, because sometimes you just won't be able to do it. And what I fear is that, if I look at this, Okoli, that's something that, I'll be honest, I don't think Enzo would have signed a player like him. I hope I'm wrong, but he hasn't looked too good with his feet right now. And that means that they will target him, especially Solanke will. Ndidi as well is obviously good at the defensive side, but there's a reason why Enzo never tried him in the double pivot. So I think that's a potential problem. And Wout Faes is also a little bit of an accident waiting to happen, as we've seen on many, many occasions. So that definitely worries me. The other thing here is we've both said that we think Mavididi may go up top. Now, whether you're a fan or not, I could agree why most people will hate that idea. But what I will say is that Mavididi, throughout his career, has played all across the front three. So he's played as a right winger, a left winger, a 10, and even as a 9. He has done that, and they have rotated that. He is powerful, he's strong, he's tall, he's fast, and he is a decent finisher. So to be fair, given that Patson Daka's out, and listen, I like Tom Cannon. I think there is a good player there. I think he will eventually become a Premier League player. Who knows? He may even do it this season. But if you know that Spurs are going to really push up high and that you can hit them on the break, I do think there is something to be said for having a fast player up top, because this is one thing I think about the entire season, actually. Despite the fact that right now you and I are feeling pretty negative, and I think the fan base is in general, the one thing I'll say is that pretty much against any team that's better than you, if you've got power and pace up front and you've got a way to find that power and pace, you always have an opportunity. And last season, we had like 70% of the ball so many times, and we still occasionally lost games. And a lot of those goals, it was purely because we got hit on the transition. And look, we got Mads Hermansen. He's really good on the ball. And we've got Mavididi. I can see you're absolutely desperate to say something. So
sorry. It's
please
kind of light
tell me
bulb
what
just
you
go
think there.
ahead. I've got a very good question for you, and I've got a very good issue to highlight right now.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me who you think gave 80% of the ball to Harry Winks last season.
Oh, Vestergaard.
And he's not in this lineup, and he doesn't look to be in the last team. So how can you build it up from the back, and how can you get it to those people up front if Winks is not able to receive the ball? Because as you just mentioned, Okoli is not good at his feet, and he's right behind him.
Well, that's all we'll have to see. I mean, look, this is what we've predicted, but you never know. He might start Vestergaard for that reason. I agree. If I was looking at a team, that's the change that I would make, and realize that the pace isn't necessarily there. And look, I'm also saying that, we'll get to it at the end of this preview, but I'm expecting Spurs to have 60% of the ball probably in this match. So for that reason, I don't think this is going to be a point where we're necessarily going to get exploited because we've pushed up high and they managed to find the man in behind. That, let's be honest with you, that's the reason why he may not start Vestergaard in some matches, is he's thinking that, if they've got Solanke, Son, and Kulusevski and they get in behind, then we can't play Vestergaard because he's going to get taken out of the game. So that means you either have to have some other players to make up for that, or you don't do it at all. So that's maybe what he's thinking there. But listen, I do agree. I think we've been a bit unfair to Wout Faes, because when Vestergaard was suspended, he used Faes quite a lot of the time as the builder, and he'd bring someone else next to him. But I would say that you really noticed the downgrade. You really noticed it. Vestergaard, you have to give that man his props. He is slow for a big man. He's surprisingly bad in the air. But on the deck, do you know what? He's honestly top 10 Premier League material. It's just a shame about the rest of his game. But that aspect of it, he's definitely very good. But yeah, that's where we're going to kind of go then. So that's that. Now, what I think I'd like to do is kind of talk about then. So yeah, this is I've actually put my lineup, and you can actually see, and I swear to you, we didn't do this before we kind of did this, but my lineup is almost the same. Now, what I've got here is just when it's going to kind of defensive shape and where we're going to start with that. Occasionally you might have a 4-3-3 shape instead of the 4-4-2, but it is basically the same thing. But what I wanted to do is talk about some key battles. So for me, I think this game is going to come down to a few individual battles. And I feel like whoever wins these is going to not necessarily win the game, but it's going to have a big difference. So the first one is kind of a funny one. We've got Harry Winks versus James Maddison. And the reason why this is a funny one is that a few seasons ago, we'd have had James Maddison and they'd have had Harry Winks, although not necessarily starting. So it's a funny old game, is football, where sometimes these things move over. And as I say, I'm sure he'll get a very warm reception, James Maddison. He deserves it. It was very good for us. when he was here. But why is this going to be a key battle? Well, here, if we look at the pitch, Winks is going to be playing at the base of our build-up when we're in our 3-2-5 shape, and Maddison is their cam. He's like effectively their 10 that plays just in behind Solanke. So they're the two that are going to be in each other's vicinity pretty quickly. And Brendan, whether people like him or hate him, and I know that most people hate him, but he was very good at transforming James Maddison's game, and he really got him to press and push up the pitch and turned him more into a kind of hybrid 8/10 than just a pure 10. So in one of our, previous looks at pre-season, Luke, you might remember this, but I showed you some of our build shape, and this was against Augsburg. And what I said to you is that quite often we actually only build with one player, which is Harry Winks, and the other defensive midfielder pushes up. And here you can see Ndidi in the 6 has pushed up to try and give more options going forward, and Winks himself has the ball here. Now, it's kind of funny because this is blue and white, and I've got a feeling that this could be this screenshot you'll probably see exactly again on Monday. And that'll be Winks, and behind him will be James Maddison. And this is what I'm saying is the key battle, because Maddison will probably be told as your pressing trigger, as soon as you see the ball getting played to him, win the ball, foul him if you have to, don't let Harry Winks build. Harry Winks' job is that when you receive the ball, look after it, turn, make something happen. So if Harry Winks wins that duel, we'll be able to get going and start building from the back. And if Maddison wins that duel, we won't be able to get going at all. And that's kind of the worry, because when we played Lons, the thing was, it wasn't just the 3-0 scoreline. It's like we never, forget about even scoring. We never even got past midfield. And it's because they really closed us down. They pressed us. And I remember your words vividly in my head. You said to me, they look like the Leicester City of last season. And we look like the team that what we were doing to our other teams last season. So look, what I will say is that's a pre-season match. This is the real thing on Monday. Things can change. He might also bring in another player, or he might change Wilfred Ndidi's position. But that's why it's a key battle, because we either get going or we don't get going. And if we don't get going, we're in for a rough evening, in my opinion. So that's one key battle. But I think there's another key battle. And I think this one's one that might favour us. So I think we're going to see Ndidi, and I think he's going to be up against Archie Gray. Perhaps it'll be Bergvall, but I've got a feeling it'll be Archie Gray. So as I showed you in that previous picture, Ndidi's probably going to push up the pitch. And that means that at times we could look to engage them. So Spurs, they build with this kind of box 4 at the back too, and they have these 2 defensive midfielders. So the ball is going to get played into them. And Ndidi, we know he's got certain strengths. He's tall, he's physical, he's got a great engine on him, and he has got Spider-Man legs. He is a brilliant tackler of the ball. And I think just from a purely physical perspective, he can monster, as we would call it. He's going to monster. Great. He could really give him a tough time. And honestly, if I was Cooper, I would say bully him. Steve Cooper, to be fair to him, one thing he did when he was at Forest is he appreciated, the art of having physicality. It's really important in the Premier League. We know that Archie Gray is really good technically, but he's still not a fully developed man. He's still a teenager. So you can take advantage of that. So I believe when we target them, and maybe it's not going to be Ndidi, but I think Ndidi's our best player for doing this, is that if we target him, because who knows, maybe Hamza Chowdhury will be in the team. He was in the team against Lons, by the way. So if this is the case, if Ndidi can win the ball off them and snap them, we could get something going. Because again, if we win the ball quickly here, we got a quick ball out wide to our wingers, and we could get an opportunity that way. And on the transition, we could be good. So let's see how it goes. I think it'd be better to target this position rather than Papa Matassar, who's the other holding midfielder. He's still quite young himself, but he is a bit more of a physical unit. And actually, if we are playing Buonanotte, even though he's got really good pressing stats, he might not be so good at getting at him. But that is a definite flaw, I don't know about flaw, but a way that you could target him. And I think that is going to be a key battle in the game. Right. So we've talked about that, but I do need to talk about one other thing. So thank God Spurs have sold Harry Kane, because otherwise, you know what? I'm still convinced that Harry Kane is going to score against us on Monday, even though he plays for Bayern Munich. That's just how much he's terrified us. I remember being at the King Power. We actually won this game, but I'm not making this up. Harry Kane fell over, and as he fell over, he scored a goal. And, it's one of those where you can dislike him all you want, but you just have to say to yourself, I mean, what an elite player. Sorry, got anything to say about the one-on-one battle between Ndidi and Gray?
Mate, I think it's a spot-on thing that you've brought up. And if it were me and if I were Cooper, I would be saying, I want you to foul him in the first 10 minutes, snap his legs early, get him nervous, and then and get the better of him mentally. Also, one last thing that you might want to think about here as well is you like to talk to me about pressing triggers. Now, if you're going to hope that we're going to hit him on the counter and then transition out wide, what's alarming is you went to talk about pressing triggers, but we haven't seen anything really reminiscent in any of our preseason games in terms of like a trigger when you press with a counter. So we haven't seen that yet. Definitely could be added. It could be something particularly to exploit how Tottenham could potentially set up. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would disagree with that slightly. I think in the Augsburg match we did see some of that. We were way more pressing against them. I do wonder if against Lons, like one thing I noticed is that against Lons, we actually let them have the ball very high up the pitch and we only started pressing them in midfield. So that's something you'd call a mid press. Whereas against Augsburg, we were trying more of a high press. And I think that's because, again, it's kind of like respecting the opposition a little bit. You're kind of saying if we get caught too high up the pitch against Spurs, they'll kill us. But if we win the ball in the midfield area, maybe we've got a chance against them. Like it really didn't work against Lons, by the way. But I'm just saying, if we're talking about if football's played on paper, that's maybe the way to go. But I think your point is merited. But for example, you know what? That's a really good thing. And maybe we could show that in future videos because with Spurs, we'd be able to work out exactly where the pressing triggers should be. And I suspect that what they will do is they will look for either Romero or Van der Ven when they play the ball into either Gray or Sarr. That's the one that they would target. And, you know, maybe if they are going to go for like, Romero to Gray, for example, that could be the one because you get two players out of position. So I think that would be the pressing trigger. But let's keep an eye on it because it's not the only way to go, by the way. You know, you might just want to like block off the lanes and things like that or force them. You know, there's also traps. So there's a concept of a pressing trap. So a trap is you actually want them to play the ball into Archie Gray because then you're going to get Ndidi on him. But I do have to say, I do respect, and I think you'd be a very popular Leicester City manager with your foul them in the first 10 minutes. There is, you know, often the charm of F them up, get into them to really get about them being physical. But I do agree. And I think I remember when Forest absolutely battered us in the FA Cup, that's something they did so well. They just bullied Leicester. And Leicester just looked like, crying, asking for mummy to come on and help them. And they just made us look like idiots. And we're at home. We can get the crowd behind them. And yeah, do it. Take even a few yellows early on to like really set the tone of it and make it uncomfortable. Make them feel like, they didn't really want to turn up for this and they're still on holidays. Always possible that could happen. So yeah, that's very good. Anything else that you think we might be able to identify in this?
No, mate, that's spot on.
Cool. Well, yeah, as mentioned before then, so Harry Kane is gone, but they have just dropped 60 million on a new signing. And, you know, Maddison only cost 40. So this is like, 50% more expensive. So this is, of course, Dominic Solanke. Now, it's funny because for the last few seasons, he's been an absolute meme. People laughing about Bournemouth having spent 25 million and he hadn't really done anything. He had come through Chelsea's youth academy, by the way. I don't know if people were aware of that. So he was very highly rated. In fact, he actually worked with Steve Cooper when they won the Under-20s World Cup many years ago. So it's a player he will know well. But it's fair to say that last season, Solanke had what you can only describe as the breakout season. So he was playing under Iraola for Bournemouth. And Iraola, very similar to Spurs, they also love to press really high up the pitch. And here you can see some stats that are taken from the Premier League website as well. And you can see his heat map and you can see just how red it is. And where is it? It's right up in the middle of the box. And that's because he is a pressing machine. He gets right up there, causes trouble, and he's really good at it. So he scored 19 goals last season and 3 assists. But if we look at this here, it's the touches in the box, shots, XG, goals. So he's going to get really up there. And a lot of people have been saying that this was maybe the best signing in terms of a fit for a club that you could think of, because he is going to play exactly the way that they want to. Like, for example, it's interesting. I don't know if you caught this morning, but Enzo Maresca's just told Ben Chilwell that he can leave Chelsea. And I'm not really surprised because the way that he wants his left foot and centre backs, he knows that he's not going to be good enough to play that position. Well, with Spurs, they'll have done their research and they'll have known that Dom Solanke was ideal. So last season, they were playing Richarlison up front. It didn't really work. And unfortunately, I think he will really transform them. I'm hoping he doesn't do it against us, but that is a 1-in-2 ratio, really high up the pitch, is expected. Something to kind of watch out for. Now, that could be potentially why he's not going to play Vestergaard. I don't know. Vestergaard is good on the ball, but to be fair, that's when he's got time on the ball. Will you get time on the ball when you're up against it? You got to play your way out of the press, and they're going to press up very high. we will see. I just wonder about you. He's obviously not a player we saw too much of last season because we were too busy concentrating on the Sammy Schmodics and, Jorginho Rutters of the world in the Championship. But what do you make of Solanke, and how do you think we could maybe hold him or prevent him from causing mischief?
I think from everything that you've just pointed out and from what I'm aware of from seeing him myself, I think he's going to fit perfectly into Tottenham and how they play under Ange, and he's really going to complement as players going to complement him, having Song alongside you, Maddison, because it's very, very, very good signing for Tottenham. I think he's going to be an absolute beast. I am worried, and how do we deal with that? Sometimes, from everything I just said about Ndidi, foul him early. We know Faze can get stuck in sometimes, and if you haven't got, look, let's talk about this. Do you think any of our centre backs have the quality to deal with a player like that? You're probably going to say to me, no. Okay, then. So what are we going to do? We're forced just to get ugly. I think without Faze, if you don't foul him in the first 10 minutes and snap his legs, you're getting subbed off at halftime. We have to be ruthless. Honestly, what else do you want me to say? And I spot on agree with you about Yannick, and I've been saying that for the longest time. If it was, we keep saying this, but if Enzo was in charge, I think that Yannick would work. Yeah, why? Because we're going to have time on the ball. We're not going to have time on the ball. Okoli, haven't seen enough of him yet, and particularly I haven't seen him with someone of Solanke's quality, and so we'll have to wait and see. But if it's probably going to be Faze marking him, snap his legs early. Let's get stuck in, lad.
Well, I'm not going to actually disagree with you. I think you make a lot of points. I think, you made a really telling question there. You said, do you think any of our centre-backs are good enough to handle a player like Solanke? I mean, we all know the answer to that. It's a no. And I mean, let's be honest, the way that the Premier League is there's multiple leagues within one league, right? There's the top of the table, which this season is probably only going to be a 2-horse race. I don't think Liverpool will make it this season. That said, when you've got Mo Salah in your team, I feel like you've always got a chance, but I can't see them going the distance. Then you've got the top 4 race, then you've got the kind of top half race, then you've got the bottom half race and the relegation battle. And I think the relegation battle was probably 5 to 6 teams. So to be fair, I feel like anyone in the last 5 to 6 probably can't deal with a player like this. And you're right, if you can't deal with it on a one-to-one basis, how do you get away with it? Yeah, I think, that is definitely one way, is try and make it ugly and try and get physical. I think especially at home, there's something to be said for that. I guess the other way is you could just be more like, okay, we know that we're going to be up against it, but we're just going to be compact and deep and just look to hit on the break. I mean, what I would say is you don't want to go down to 10 men against a team like this. You'll be in trouble. But, referees, it has been shown statistically, they tend to favour the home team. They also tend to be a little bit less card happy on the first couple of games of the season. So, yeah, I guess we were saying if you put him out for a few weeks at the start of the season, that could be one way to do it. But look, we will say that to give him credit, Fast, when he's at his best, is by engaging defenders early and being physical and robbing the ball of him. And I remember we beat Spurs a few seasons ago where Fast, he robbed the ball from Harry Kane. He played a fantastic pass into one of our midfielders, and Tete, of all people, scored. I don't know if you remember that one. And that all came because of Fast being proactive. So that's something to be said, and that is definitely a way to go. So let's see how it goes. But for sure, it is a bit of a warning sign. They actually have just signed another player called Wilson Odoba from Burnley, but I think he's more one for the future. I'm not sure we'll see him as a starter, whereas Solanke is definitely coming in as first team to start. We just know that. So that's how we go. And look, let's just give our thoughts and then our predictions. So here's how I see it. Tell me if you agree or disagree. So I think Spurs are going to dominate the game. I think they're going to have more possession. I think in general, when we play any of the teams from the top 6 or 7 last year, that's how it's going to be. I don't think you'd expect any different. I think playing out from the back will be very hard. I'm not even sure if we'll do it, but if we do try to do it, it's going to be bad. And do you remember last season, there were some games where we started playing out from the back, and even early doors, we made some mistakes. Do you remember we played Sunderland quite early on and we beat them? But in the first sort of half an hour, man, our playing out from the back was absolutely atrocious. And Jack Clark almost got in a few times. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the first couple of minutes there are things like that. Or do you remember in the last show, we showed Hamza Chowdhury getting robbed of the ball and they didn't score Lons, but they almost did off it. I think we might see some things like that. I think, look, the game is going to be about many periods of hanging on. And I think the longer that the game goes 0-0, that's better for us. But I will say that even though all of it, I said that, even if we get hammered by Spurs, and that could happen, I still think that they're going to give up chances because it's just the way that they play. There would, I'd be shocked if at the end of the game we haven't had at least one opportunity where it was a pretty reasonable chance to at least test the keeper really well or even score. So I think that will happen. I said I expect Mavididi up top because of his pace. We'll see. Maybe that won't be the way, but I think that could happen. I've said that I think Daka unironically will be a big miss for this reason. Cannon, I think, is a really good finisher. He looks that way. But I think, balling behind someone like Daka could get the better of even Van der Ven or Romero, could cause them some problems. And I have said, though, that the crowd have to be the 12th man. So sadly, I won't be there on Monday. But anyone that is, if you're watching this, you've really got to get behind the team. One thing I will say I think favours us is it being in the evening. The King Power tends to be a lot more ferocious on that. One thing I've noticed that if you have like a Saturday afternoon kickoff, man, the crowd, they don't even seem like they've woken up yet. And we often lose games and that. But in the evening kickoffs, we tend to be surprisingly stronger than we would do normally. And case in point, do you remember the Southampton game where we won 5-0? That was an evening kickoff. King Power was rocking and it works really well. And that could happen. But I have to say that despite all of that, so my personal prediction, and unfortunately, I've gone for a 3-0 win to Spurs. After all that build-up, I've not put a good one. Why do I think this? Look, you got to call a spade a spade. Our transfer business has been really, really poor. Right now, I think our starting 11 and our squad is weaker than last season. I don't think that's controversial to say. And we're carrying some injuries. So Daka and Vardy won't even be playing. And Vardy was definitely our best striker last season. I know everyone, certainly a lot of the fans really rate Cannon, but he didn't play as many games or score as many goals as Daka. Iheanacho's gone. So I'm just calling it how I see it. So we're weaker. I also don't think Steve Cooper will start Ricardo. I think that's madness because I think he's probably our best player in the entire squad right now, given that Kieran Dewsbury Hall's gone. So if he's not going to start, that makes again the team weaker than last season. All of that could be forgiven if I could see like confidence, clear patterns of play in the pre-season. And listen, we could have lost all 3 pre-season games, but we could have looked fantastic. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes that happens because the result is kind of irrelevant. Be like, wow, look at how we're popping it about. And yeah, they're still not 100% fit and we aren't taking the chances, but it's looking so good. I'm really excited. And unfortunately, especially the last game in particular, but it wasn't just that one, we looked poor. So I think it's bad. Conversely, if I look at Spurs, I think they made a fantastic signing. They're not carrying too many injuries. I think they'll be up for it. I think the way that they'll play, they'll be looking forward to it. Maddison, I mean, the only thing is I hope that maybe he gets a bit emotional and he maybe eases off a little bit rather than trying to absolutely kill us. But that's a player and he'll be confident. He'll have played amongst all those people in training and he'll know how to shimmy and get past them. So for me, it's not the most confident prediction, but hopefully Mr. Optimism here. So Luke, what do you think? What's your prediction for this game?
I think that we might hold off for about 10, 15, 20 minutes, 0-0. And once that first goal comes in, I see the floodgates opening. I see a 5-0 loss. If you want to see, I'm curious to see how long you think the board, who we have no faith in at the moment, will give Cooper. And I ask you that. And if you want to find out what we think about that, you'll have to tune into our show tomorrow. So get your comments in, how long you think it will take for Cooper if we go for a bunch of games with a win. But for me, what worries me the most about is this 5-0 prediction is we've already seen it a little bit in preseason, is the morale and players starting to argue with one another, which we did not see at all last season. So you talk about managers and losing the dressing room, but in my opinion, there needs to be something that can be said for losing that chemistry or the belief in each other in a team. And that all comes down to management and coaching, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the things that worry me that set the tone. And then we haven't even got our points deduction yet. So that is the last thing we need to start to kick off the season. Players turning, arguing, goalkeeper losing confidence, centre backs, people not wanting to receive the ball. I see this being an ugly game, to be honest. I reckon I'll be watching it behind the couch now.
I don't think you'll be the only one. And look, sadly, I could see you being right. I think actually with my prediction, the reason why I've gone for only 3-0 is I think opening game of the season, they won't necessarily be in full gear. They might hold off if they get 2 or 3-0 up. I think Maddison won't want to take the mick. He won't be as motivated because, he'll still feel something for us. But I think you could be right. But look, I do think one of the points you made is something that I've picked up on too. And it is concerning. That is body language. because that's like one of those things that you can't really help. Do you know, like sometimes they take a photo of someone and they're smiling, but if you actually look at the top part of their face, you can see they're not smiling at all. It's like the classic one you see of like Melania Trump when she's standing next to Donald Trump. She'll fake the smile, but inside she just wants to kill herself. It's one of those. And you saw that like players were remonstrating with each other. I remember when Danny Ward was in the team for some of the friendlies, they were really having a go at himself. And it looks like standards have slipped. So yeah, that definitely concerns me too. And that is never a good sign. Look, maybe they're frustrated with themselves more than anything else, because what I will say is even under Enzo, we had a bad spell, if you remember, where we were dropping goals and games, almost you couldn't explain it. And then eventually Vardy's brought them into the dressing room and just kicked some ass and they came out. And then to be fair, we looked more like the Leicester of old and we got our mojo back. So look, maybe it's just one of those spells. I would also say that you never know with football, right? Like, even though I think it could go that way, I mean, what if early on we do get a goal on the break, we do score, so that, really hype up the crowd and give ourselves something to chase? It's always possible. Someone pulls out a moment of magic. So even though we've gone for those scores, like I say, I just think the way that the squad is set up this season, I do always think we've got a chance whilst it's 0-0. As you say, I kind of feel like once we go one down, though, how I'm guessing you're predicting it and why you think the floodgates are open is then, if anything, we're going to start attacking, which is just going to make it even easier for them to score, right? Whereas it might be ridiculous, but I remember we played Man City during COVID and we beat them 5-2. Do you remember that game? It was a crazy game.
Yes,
but
I do.
Riyad Mahrez scored after just 6 minutes and he scored an absolute worldie. Like, he just absolutely belted it in. One of those goals that you can't even be mad. Like, we're all Riyad Mahrez fans. He's done it so much for us. And it's like, what do we even do? But I think what was interesting in that game is we started off as a counter-attack. And even though they went 1-0 up, Man City, we didn't change the way we played. We just counter-attacked. And then it actually started working. And I think that was smart because it showed patience. It's like, Man City, they're not going to let off. They're going to keep going. So even though we're behind, don't change the tactics, which might sound a bit stupid. But look, that was away with no fans. And I think the problem with the King Power, as you kind of mentioned, is, if we saw like the sort of performance we saw against Lons, where you can't even make any passes and you haven't put any shots on target, the crowd are going to boo. Doesn't matter if it's your first game in charge. They're irate because they haven't seen the transfers. They haven't seen like the push. By the way, we had no season friendlies at the King Power, which is ridiculous. So this is the first time that anyone's seeing the team play since the last game of last season, which we also lost, by the way, but at least we managed to win the title. So that is kind of concerning, I think, in that regard. And so for that, yeah, I think the loss is probably an accurate result. But look, even though we say that, and I want to say that again, because a lot of people have said, oh, it's very negative, this channel. I think we're trying to represent the mood of the fans. We will always get behind the team. And I would love for nothing more than for us to do the post-match review and say, this was a Steve Cooper masterclass. Maybe we're coming round on him. There's certain things he's done. You never know. We could hope for that. So let's see how it goes. But look, with that, Luke, thank you very much for your time. If you haven't, do subscribe to Leicester City Down Under. Please like and comment on the video. Let us know what you think. How do you think the game will go? What are you expecting? As mentioned, we're going to be dropping another video soon, which is going to be our entire season preview. So not just this match, but Monday night, it's back at long last. We're back in the Premier League. Let's get behind the boys. Thank you. Goodbye. And thanks for tuning in. This has been for Fox 8 TV.